late arrivals anyway. Okay, we'll make a start. Good afternoon and welcome to this Mentor Skills Awareness session. It's great to see so many people being able to join the call. I'm Derek Thompson. I'm one of the business relationship managers in the graduate apprenticeship team at Heriot-Watt University. The session today is in two parts. First of all, we'll play a recording of the previous webinar, and this allows us to ensure a consistent message is delivered to the workplace mentors across all of our GA cohorts. The presentation takes about 30 minutes and it will be followed by our question and answer session where you will have the opportunity to ask myself and others in the GA team about anything that relates to mentoring your GA student. So if you'd like to make a note of anything that comes to mind during the presentation, and we can then pick that up either from the chat function, or if you raise your hand function, use that raise hand function at the end. We'll pick them up at the end. So just before we start, a couple of housekeeping points. Today's session is being recorded to allow us to share it with anyone who couldn't attend today. And also, if you could please keep your cameras and microphones off. I can hear someone chatting in the background. Yeah, if you could just keep them off for now until the Q&A part, and that would be appreciated. Okay, so we'll now start the presentation. I'll attempt to click the right button. Welcome to our Mentor Skills online webinar presentation. This is a bespoke short introductory session designed exclusively to support people who have a role as a work-based mentor for a graduate apprentice at Heriot-Watt. I'm Derek Thompson. I'll be your host for this webinar. I'm one of the business relationship managers at Heriot-Watt in the graduate apprenticeship team. I'm also a chartered member of CIPD, which is the professional body for HR and learning development professionals. And prior to joining Heriot-Watt, I spent most of my career working across a range of business sectors in my professional capacity, helping other people to access learning. During this time, I achieved qualifications in coaching and mentoring through the Institute of Leadership Management. Nowadays, and together with my Heriot-Watt colleagues, I help employers to navigate the GA application process, which includes identifying a work-based mentor who will support the new GA on a day-to-day basis. So what we find when we speak to employers is they have two main questions about the role of the work-based mentor. Firstly, employers and mentors want to know what's involved in mentoring a GA. And this was previously covered during a series of online induction webinars.
Hi, Derek, sounds dropped.
Just as if it's been muted, Derek, so you'll need to unmute yourself and then go back a little bit.
Sorry, what's happened?
Sounds dropped, Derek.
Sounds dropped out.
Yeah, I think you muted, you were muted.
You'll find the email address on the final slide at the end of this presentation. Is it back now? So the second question is what today's session is designed to help with. We want to help you get started by providing some support. And of course, that really depends on what level of support you're looking at and what level you're already at. We cover a short introduction to mentoring. I'm going to provide information to help you identify what's required to be an effective mentor. We will discuss some of the skills involved and the tools and techniques that can help you structure and facilitate a positive and productive conversation with your graduate apprentice. So think about it this way. How did you learn to swim or cycle or drive a car or play golf or tennis? So the information we share here will only help to get you started. However, you need to create the learning conditions for yourself by doing, by taking part, by practicing, maybe with a colleague, by kind of a flight simulation. Allow yourself to make mistakes and then learning from those mistakes. Of course, by providing some guidance here today, we can help to minimize those mistakes. You may be completely new to the role of mentor, or you may have previously carried out mentoring and you're just looking for a bit of a refresher. Today, we can build on your existing knowledge and help you connect that to what's required in mentoring. So what can you expect? Well, in some ways, a blinding glimpse of the obvious. This is the part that we call the 3 R's. And the first R is remind. We'll discuss something you already know, but maybe had forgotten. The reinforce, is about things you're already doing, or perhaps reassuring you these are the right things to do. And finally, reveal, you may come across something that you hadn't seen before. So today is very much about signposting you to things that you maybe hadn't considered before, and about raising your awareness of things that you may need more help with in developing your mentoring skills. So if that's what you're here for, you've come to the right place. So our agenda for today is created to help you to get ready to mentor your GA. It's an introduction to mentoring, and so to get started on that, we need to refer to what I call the what and the why questions. And these are about helping us to define what is mentoring, what is coaching, what's the difference, and why bother. So what are the benefits? And once we've looked at that, we'll be ready to look at the how. The how then has several parts. The first part of how is, well, what's the process? And what's the importance of something called contracting? And we'll talk about what that is. Another part of how then is to look at the tools and techniques, how we use feedback and how we use a simple model to provide a structure to the mentoring conversation, a model called GROW, which you maybe seen before. And finally then, the other part of how that really is teased out of this is what are the core skills of mentoring and coaching. So as you can see from this slide, we've got a lot to get through and it may be going at a fair pace. However, you'll be sent a copy of the recording and a copy of the slides. So anything you do feel is dealt with a bit quickly, you can review the content at your leisure. So let's start with what mentoring is. On-the-job support provided over a long term to assist with somebody's development. In this case, it's your GA. So no surprise there. And usually what we find is that mentoring is carried out by someone with more experience, a more experienced colleague. This definition tends to suggest more junior or inexperienced member of staff, but there's also something called reverse mentoring, where more junior people can mentor more senior people. The CIPD gives us a kind of traditional view of this, involving the exchange of experience, support, guidance, and advice. So probably no surprises there. And what I found in preparing for this was this kind of collage of words, which I found quite enlightening. Most of the words here we probably associate with mentor. They should fit somewhere into your definition. But notice the term coach is included. Now with coaching, the definition is more about unlocking people's potential and developing them in a way where they discover the old adage here about if you give a person one answer, then that's all they have to deal with. If you teach them how to find the answer, then that's much more productive and prepares them for the future. Again, CIPD provides us with a definition, which when I read it, developing a person's skills and knowledge so that their performance improves, it really leads me to wonder how much different that is to mentoring. And so what we see in conversation that coaching and mentoring are used interchangeably. However, they're not the same thing. And it's important we have a look at some of the differences. So coaching is a non-directive conversation. It's forward-looking, encouraging people to think and act. Recognizing answers lie within individuals. So that's where we can use this in mentoring. And let me show you a diagram then that shows how mentoring and coaching have a relationship, where mentoring is more about advising and coaching is more about asking. And this takes us to a diagram that's been developed called the coaching continuum. You'll see that there's a close relationship in terms of helping someone develop. So whereas coaching is more about asking, mentoring is more about advising. Developing this theme into the coaching continuum, we see the words push and pull at either ends. So in any conversation with your GA, you're more likely to move back and forth along this continuum, depending on the needs of the individual and also the situation you're trying to help them with. The questions you might ask yourself in preparing for these conversations would include things like, do they need a push to get started? You know, should I be instructing and giving advice? Or do they need pulled to get them thinking about how to work it out for themselves? So I ask them questions and listen, and then maybe suggest some options. So here are a couple of slides which give comparisons between mentoring and coaching. At the top of this one, we'll see some comparisons about the longevity of the relationship. So mentoring is more the long-term relationship, and in the GA's case, that's typically over 4 years if they're starting in year one. Short term is more associated with coaching, where it's a specific aspect that's being coached. The coach doesn't need to be an expert, whereas the mentor is passing on experience. So in terms of differences, that's a key one. In terms of similarities, the focus is on developing the GA, and so the agenda for the meeting has to be their responsibility. They know what they need help with. This slide shows kind of split top and bottom, where the top shows the differences between mentoring and coaching, and the bottom shows the similarities. So already we're starting to see that skills like listening and asking questions will be part of the conversation, regardless of whether we perceive ourselves to be performing mentoring or performing coaching. In summary, we can recognize that coaching and mentoring share similar approaches. They share the use of these conversational skills that I mentioned, like questioning, listening, building rapport, relationship building. So, as we say, they're not the same thing, and I guess the key points to bear in mind are coaching is about asking, it's about helping the person to discover the answers, and that way that develops them through learning through that discovery. Mentoring, on the other hand, is about advising, telling and sharing the experience. So again, learning takes place. Some key points here. Mentoring helps someone manage their career and improve their skills. Also about those positive and negative experiences, sharing those. And I think a key point here then is to consider using coaching conversations and mentoring as part of your mentoring process. Move on to what the benefits are. And here we're really answering the questions why. So why be a mentor? What's in it for me? What's in it for a GA? What's in it for the organization? And what's in it for you? So first one is the benefits for the mentee, the GA. So as we can see, it's no surprise about building their confidence, helping them to develop, supporting them in transfer of learning. Many of the GAs may be coming from school into the workplace, so we need to consider the kind of transition that they're undertaking and what that feels like for them and how they need support that perhaps someone who's already in the workforce wouldn't need. Developing relationships, communication skills, and a very important aspect of developing a GA will be their emotional development and their resilience, because studying for a GA program is not an easy thing. What would be the benefits for the organization? A positive impact on culture, really, the work environment, staff development, and also leadership skills within the organization. So there's lots of positive things that the organization can take from fostering a mentoring culture within its workforce. But in terms of benefits for you as a mentor, what's in it for you? Some people have said to me previously, I think of it as giving something back. So that's quite good if someone's already been through a degree journey themselves and they're now embedded in the workforce. Developing your own skills and confidence, leadership skills, enhances your CV, and of course it provides you with experience you can use if you're going to go for a more senior role, and there's invariably a competency-based selection process there. So in summary, for mentoring, it's about a relationship. It's a relationship where more experienced or more knowledgeable person helps to guide a less experienced or less knowledgeable person. Age isn't really important. It's more about the expertise. And what is important, of course, is the reasons for doing it. You should want to be a mentor and have that ability to build the professional relationship. So mentoring will benefit your career, it'll keep your employee engaged, and it helps nurture retention and inclusion. Just thinking for a minute, the relationship that we're talking about here. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship that we're trying to instill here between the mentor and the GA. That's going to happen through regular informal conversation. The detail really is up to you. So it can help for you to start with the future in mind. And what I mean by that is There's a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People from Stephen Covey. And one of the habits in there is start with the end in mind. So if you apply that, maybe it helps to think about what's going to look like in 4 years' time when this is all over. Who will have gained from this? Hopefully both you and the GA. So what will you have gained? And that can help get your relationship off to a good start. So having dealt with the questions, what is mentoring? Why is it of benefit? We can now move on to the how. The how do we do mentoring? How do we become a mentor, an effective mentor? Or if you're already a mentor, how do I confirm I'm doing a good job? And we need to think about what the mentoring process is. Here's a simple diagram that explores the sequence, the process, the cycle of events. In this section of the webinar, we're going to look at this in a bit more detail. But here we can see we're helping the GA explore the challenges and aspiration. That's about 2 o'clock on the slide. Then we move into discussing choices and options, which is a key part of the coaching aspect, as is discussing possible outcomes, and finally helping the GA to establish likely solutions and the next steps. The process is actually a bit more complicated than that. And this diagram is probably a bit too complicated for you to read in detail on the screen. And again, I would emphasize you get a copy of this sent to you for your future reflection. And I'm just thinking, actually in here at about 12 o'clock, there again is emphasis that it's about the GA arranging those meetings and preparing for the meetings and driving the whole process. But just above that, at the very top, there's a box that says at the first meeting, the mentor and the mentee agree how to work. And that's what I want to talk about now. It's known as contracting. It's a very important step. It helps you get off to the best possible start in building this relationship. And so here's a sample where it will allow you to discuss things like what do you expect from each other? When shall we review progress? How often shall we meet? What are the ground rules? Who will be responsible for driving things? What contributions will each party be committed to? And if problems arise, how will they be resolved? But there's other things that should be in there. In that sample, there's a few things missing. It's about the relationship, and I think this is the kind of list that helps us get started with contracting at the very start of the processes. I mean, how are you going to introduce, if you've never met this GA before, and potentially you have at this stage in the semester, but if you haven't, then how are you going to introduce yourself? Confidentiality is a key thing here. Discussing potential conflicts of interest. All the things on this list really are important, but there may be other things. So what else would we add here? Think about that when you're putting together your list. Good practice in mentoring is for the mentee to take notes and to take from the conversation actions. And another way that we can see this in traditional mentoring is through what we call a session or learning log and followed by an action plan. But essentially with the GA, that's what the individual learning agreement helps to focus on at these meetings with a personal tutor at Heriot-Watt. But that doesn't mean that you can't use a mechanism like this. In fact, this type of mechanism may already exist and be part of your organization's performance review system. So for GAs, whilst the individual learning agreement serves as a similar purpose, it's only reviewed in the triangular meetings at strategic points with the personal tutor. So in the meantime, you can add records or reviews and feed those details into the ILA review if you wish to do so. You and your GA can decide what's right for your own situation. So in terms of how often you should meet, here's a little thing to consider. Everyday coaching, should that be Model A, a 1-hour meeting every month, or Model B, a 3 times 5 minute interaction, which is happening every week for a month? Which one do you think would be more effective? And the answer, of course, is Model B, because of the more regular contact. And that's what we should be thinking about in terms of those meetings for the GA. If the GA isn't prompting you to have regular meetings, then maybe ask them about that in the mentoring meetings themselves. The first of our tools I want to look at is what we talk about as feedback and what feedback is and about it. You may have come across Ken Blanchard. Of course, he's amongst other things a well-respected author on leadership and motivation. But it's definitely a motivator for people is to get feedback, helping them to improve. Feedback can help build your trust and rapport. Some of the rules around this or guidance around it is to consider the timeliness of that feedback. So timeliness meaning it should be really given at the time. So if you notice something, it's best to talk about it at the time. Feedback should be regular, to the point, concise, and think about the language you use. It's better to use I language than you language. And what I mean by that is I've noticed that this happened rather than you did or you didn't. So the you language can be, taken the wrong way. It can be deemed in the mind as a bit accusatory. We've got some models to consider as it shows at the bottom part of the slide here. There's boost, bridge, and ask, tell, ask. So I'm going to go through these just to explain what they are. You may have come across these before. Now, as with most of these things, an acronym is derived just to help you to remember what it's about. So boost really stands for the feedback being balanced, objective. So we're not focusing on opinions, but we are focusing on facts. It's got to be observed behavior to really mean something to that person and specific, so that it's not very vague and something like you're always doing this is not a helpful comment. A specific comment about a specific instance helps the individual to understand what that is. And we've talked about it being timely. So that's the boost model. The bridge technique is something that is commonly seen in organizations' appraisal systems, where people are asked to focus on previous behavior or performance, what's currently happening, and what we're expecting in the future. So it's the past, the present, and the future. So these are ways of kind of connecting the three things in a sort of journey. So this is what we've done before, this is what we're doing now, and this is what we expect for the future. And the final model I want to talk about here is what's called the ask, tell, ask. I think this is probably my personal favourite. Apparently it's used in schools as well. And you might ask something like, so how do you think that went? What went well? What do you think could have been better? What could you have done better? What could you have done differently? And what would you do differently next time? What did you learn from that? And once you get a response, it allows you to consider what you're about to tell them, what you've seen, and whether there's any gap. So asking that question, first of all, helps to get an insight as to their level of self-awareness. Either you're mostly aligned on the same page with how you both see things, or you have a gap to discuss. The second part then, tell, is where you may say things like, here's what I've noticed, here's what I've found, here's what's happening. And finally, ask things like, how do they think they can improve? Does what I'm saying make sense to you? And what can you do about it? There's a final question you might want to add here. It's known as the awesome question because the first three letters of awesome, AWE, tell us the question and what else. So it's about tell me more. The second of the tools I want to look at is called the GROW model. This has been widely popularized by John Whitmore, and the GROW model again is one of those acronyms which you may have seen before. So G is for go, which is about exploring what the person wants to achieve. The R for reality, what's happening now, what's the current situation. Options are about exploring what could be done. And then finally, what's the commitment? What will they do? What's the way forward? And leading back into the cycle. So it's a fairly simple model. It's well known. It's difficult to pick up a book on coaching without finding the GROW model referred to in there somewhere. Let me share with you some questions around those stages because I believe these are helpful in getting you started with this. So when trying to establish what they want to achieve, That's very much the first question, around the goal, around the objective, around what they're looking to get help with. What would they like to focus on today or over the next semester? And what's the best use of time? So just some typical examples of what we would call goal questions. In Grow, the next one is reality. So that's about asking what's happening now, who's involved, how are things going, what's the impact, what's stopping you is a really good question. What prevents you from doing something about it, and what are the consequences of doing nothing? So some good questions in there, which I hope will help. As far as the options part of the Grow model goes, it's now about trying to get them to come up with ideas. One of the things that's part of this process is, I think, a silence, because when you ask questions in the options section, we really should be trying to get them to generate as many options as possible, ideally 4, and that helps them to explore what they could or couldn't do. Finally, once the options are on the table, we can start to explore what they will do, which option are they going to choose, what support they need, and finally, how committed they are to taking that action. What I've come across as well is what's called OSCAR. It's an alternative model, and it maps across to Grow. And the reason I share it here is because I like how it develops the Grow model and gives us slight more clarity, particularly around the options part. So O for options, under the OSCAR model, that's seen as choices and consequences. So for every choice they describe as an option, there will be a consequence. So it's about discussing what those consequences are so that helps them to choose the option. And in terms of action, the OSCAR model divides that into two parts. So it's what will they do in the Grow formula, or what's the way forward, whereas OSCAR develops that into action and how will you know that that action's been effective. So what's the review, or what's the result that we're looking for. So moving on to behaviours and skills of a good mentor. One of the things we would do in a classroom is have a bit of fun here, where we produce a kind of skills alphabet. So the idea is to find a skill for every letter of the alphabet, and perhaps to think of a role model mentor and someone you have in mind. So what is it they say or do that inspires you? And then the challenge is to come up with a letter, a word for every letter in the alphabet. Obvious ones are L for listening and Q for questioning. Of course, we don't just restrict it to skills. It can include behaviours and traits. And I remember one particularly from the class last year, which someone said J is for non-judgmental and R is for removing barriers. So we can be a bit, a bit of come and go with that. So in summary, on skills that have come out through exploring the process and exploring the tools, we see things like questioning and listening as a common conversation is basically what the mentoring and coaching approach is, and therefore questioning and listening being the 2 key skills. But there's a lot to take in, shown on this slide here. For me, I think a useful comment here is the being non-judgmental, critical friend. So how do we become a coach and a mentor? Well, the bad news is there's no magic wand or magic pill. You need to practice to develop these skills. And you may be familiar with the learning stages, a kind of conscious competence ladder. Think of it if you were driving and learning to drive for the first time, and that's when you become aware of your incompetence. Before that, you're unconscious of it. You then stick on the L plates, become aware of your level of skill being quite low, and start to develop it through taking driving lessons and practicing. That leads you to conscious competence, where in the driving analogy, you would probably view that as passing your test and getting the license. In terms of driving, what then happens is we drive about unconscious of our competence, autopilot, until we maybe take that bend too fast and we become aware of being a little bit complacent. So the old adage that practice makes perfect is also true to say practice makes permanent. So developing your skills is something you have to do through practice. So in moving on to the mentor of the role of the mentor and consolidating here, I'll just share with you a slide that I've borrowed from my colleagues who deliver the GA programs in the Edinburgh Business School. I think this very aptly captures what the mentoring role is. Helping the GA to develop their learning goals, providing that care, pastoral care in the workplace, and defending the release day, attending the meetings and matching assignments with work-based projects. That's a crucial part. So that's very specific to the GA component of mentoring. As a more general aspect of mentoring, it's about being the go-to person who provides the GA with support, advice and guidance, signposting, feedback, information about yourself, so that helps to build and cement the relationship, encouragement, and also the sounding board. So what makes mentoring work? This came from another webinar I was on where the comment at the very bottom I quite liked, so share it with you. Don't be a judge mentor. But mentoring works if you have contracts, if you have frequent meetings, if you have protected time for the mentoring itself, and if you have mechanisms to sustain confidentiality. So to finish, I'm going to share the summary slide, which is just to emphasize what we've covered today. We looked at what mentoring and coaching, what they were about, what the similarities and the differences were. We looked at the benefits for the organization, for the GA, and for the mentor. We then looked at some tools and the process, including the GROW model and feedback models, and that helped us tease out some of the skills of mentoring and coaching that we now need to start practicing. So that concludes the presentation. Hope you found that useful, either to help you get started on your mentor journey or as a refresher of the skills and techniques that you may have seen before. So I'd now like to open up the Q&A session. If you have any questions you'd like to pop into the chat, feel free to do so. Or alternatively, you can use the raise hand function, and then you can be invited to switch on your camera and mic to speak to one of the team. So we're joined today by a couple of my colleagues in the GA team. So there's quite a few of us here that can help with any questions you've got. So I guess I'll just hand over to you for questions now. Please feel free. I haven't looked at the chat, David or somebody. Anybody see any in the chat?
Nothing yet. Just when we're waiting for a question, just to remind everybody, I think Rebecca had asked a question in there, and you mentioned that during the intro, Derek, we will be sending out a recording of the session today, as well as a copy of the slides. So yeah, we'll do that in the next couple of days.
Thanks, David. Quite often in these sessions, we take a bit of time to find people brave enough to ask a question, so that's quite normal. I mean, one of the things I get asked about is how much time should a mentor be allocating to mentoring their GA? And the only answer really that fits is it depends, because it depends so much on the individual circumstance that you find yourself in. So for example, it would depend on whether this GA is a student that's come straight from school or whether they've been in the workplace for some time. And so they're going to need different levels of help in finding things in the workplace and finding out who to go to for things in the workplace, depending upon how long they've worked there. It also depends on how self-sufficient and proactive the individual is. And that's obviously down to the individual's character and how keen they are to just get on and learn things, and others need sometimes a wee bit of a nudge. I don't know if that helps prompt any thoughts in people's minds about what they might want to ask. But we're here.
So there's a couple come in, Derek. So
okay.
there's one from Nancy in terms of, I think it was near the end of I think it was from the EBS slide about defending the release day. Nancy's just asking if you can explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, that's a phrase that's used by one of our program directors, which I quite like, because in the past, what we've found is that the requirement to attend the university on what we call the release day is often something that can be compromised when work pressures are getting too much. So what we've found in working very closely in partnership with the workplace mentor, if that personal tutor and the workplace mentor and the GA themselves are having those regular meetings, then they can be much more aware of what might be coming up in the coming weeks in terms of work pressures, deadlines, performance that's expected, because 4 days a week at work can sometimes spill over into what we're calling the release day. So defending the release day, it's a robust comment, I guess, just to emphasize that without the student being able to attend university on their allocated time, and there's also a 4 hours per week commitment out with that release day. If the student isn't able to have that time, we're storing up a bit of trouble actually in the future, because it's going to come back to haunt everyone involved, where they've fallen behind with deadlines for handing in assignments or completing, bits of portfolio or whatever it happens to be within their work-based learning. So that's what that comment refers to. Does that make sense? That's Nancy.
Yep, thank you.
I think. Yeah, no problem, Nancy.
There's another one there just come out. So it's from Andy Melville. So it says, can you please emphasize the benefits of meeting on a more regular basis? So I think in this case, they would already agreed to meet on once a month.
Yeah, so once a month is a really good starting point on this. And I think if you meet once a month, at that point, you can then say, well, you can then ask the question, do you feel there would be benefits of us meeting more regularly? So again, coming back to what I was saying about how comfortable the graduate apprentice is within their organisation, if they're an established employee or if they're new to the business, so that gives you the kind of two extremes, then they may feel they need a more regular contact. They may say to you, well, it would help if we just had a 5-minute chat each day, just so as I can help you understand what's going on and how it's excuse me, how it's aligning with the curriculum that I'm trying to study. Or alternatively, they might say, yeah, once a month is fine, and it makes sense just to keep it that, because once a month will allow us to have 2 or 3 meetings in a month that we can then reflect on when we get to have that regular triangular meeting. That was what we referred to the meeting where you have the 3 people, the personal tutor, the workplace mentor, and the GA themselves. So when you get to that meeting, if you've had regular meetings once a month, you can input all that discussion you've had into the meeting with the personal tutor and use that to inform the summary that goes into the ILA, which is the individual learning agreement. Does that help with Andrew?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much for that.
No problem.
Thanks, Derek. Kevin, I see you've got your hand up. Kevin, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, Derek. So my question might be the next step. So obviously this is a sort of foundation introduction to mentorship. The mentee that I'm looking at has just started his university placement and he's got his first module. And my question is around specifically the work-based learning aspect of it. So albeit the slides are very helpful, well, yeah, I mean, I found the slides very, very helpful. But I guess what I'm looking for is there a time at which, because it talks about the GA, the personal tutor, and the mentor, agreeing, sort of the work-based the work-based learning and the work-based assignments, because then that would shape how I was to interact with the mentee as a mentor. If that does that make sense? So I could adjust our discussions, our goals, aims of the mentee, based upon what we're actually doing on the project, and in relation to what he's doing in terms of the modules at university. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, Kevin. I think I understand what it is you're asking, and essentially what you've said is correct. You will have an input as a workplace mentor to that conversation based on your knowledge of what's going on in the workplace and how it might impact on your GA's ability to find enough time to, and this goes back to one of the previous questions about, defending the release day, but it's more than that. It's beyond that. It's the 4 hours extra for consolidation within the remaining 4 days. Now, some organisations say I can't afford to give half a day or 4 hours, but what I'll do is I'll give 1 day every 2 weeks. So how you configure that extra time for self-reflection and self-study for your apprentice is entirely down to how your business is run. But in terms of what's expected of you, Kevin, as a mentor, and how to go through the mechanics of the process, if you like, of the ILA, which is the learning agreement.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'd probably want to ask you here is, did you attend the induction webinars that we had, or have you seen a recording?
I have not attended them. I do have a recording which I've not watched yet, Derek.
So I would encourage you to watch it then, because I don't know which program it is your GA is attending. Can you tell me?
It is the construction
And built environment.
Civil
Yeah.
engineering, construction and built environment. Yes.
Yeah, okay, that was a combined webinar from these two programs, because they are from the same school. So what to do then is I would encourage you to have a look at the recording from the school, which was about the well, it was the whole piece, but within that there'll be a component about the expectations of how the mentor and the personal tutor can work together and meet regularly to support the student to be successful. Okay, so have a listen to that, and by all means, if you've still got questions, come back to us and we'll help out. But I think you'll get a bit more clarity there, because it's specific to the GA program that your apprentice is studying, because they're different for each program, you see.
Yeah, understood. No, I get that. Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Derek. Thank you.
No problem.
Right, Derek. A couple more come in. I've just thought Darren Pennycook it's just as it's not really a question, but it's a follow up to the defending the release day thing. So Darren was making the observation that he was a GA student, and he's just agreeing about the point about making sure it is good to maintain that release day, because it does help to sort of keep the attending lectures and the learning going on. So yeah, I think Darren was just backing up the point you made. A couple of other questions just come in. This is from Andy Melrose. Thanks, Andy. It can occasionally be challenging coaxing information out of an 18-year-old who was at school last year. So beyond being a sort of good listener and asking open-ended question type of thing, is there any sort of advice you would offer a mentor engaging with that sort of school leaver young mentee?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Andy. And I think from experience, the more coaching type questions you can use, the more coaching type, if you consider coaching and mentoring, as I mentioned in the webinar, they're quite different, even though there's some strong links between them. So if you can imagine just in your conversation where you sit down with a person, ask yourself the question internally, have I got my coaching hat on or my mentoring hat on? And probably do more coaching and ask more coaching type questions to get the person to open up. So if you ask them, so what's going on? How are you feeling today? How are you getting on? And then the secret really is just to be quiet and listen. And that's often difficult, particularly with someone who might be a bit shy or introverted or unsure of themselves and just need a wee bit of confidence building. And if that's the kind of candidate you've got, then it really is a hard one to sit there silent. If it's a real struggle, then I think another question, sometimes a scaling question can help. There was a slide that mentioned a scale of 1 to 10, but we didn't have time to go into scaling questions per se, so I'll cover it here. And a scaling question is about saying to the candidate, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is, really, let's say their level of confidence, where 1 is really not very confident about what I'm doing and 10 is really confident, where would you rate yourself today? And if they rate themselves like a number 2 or a number 3, which is probably understandable at the beginning of the journey, then it's useful to come back and use that question again in a month or 2 or 3 months' time and assess whether they feel themselves, with their own self-assessment, have they moved up that scale at all? And if not, then what's holding them back? What do they perceive as being the barriers to progression up that scale, which they've just, made up in their mind based on the question you've asked them? So I think it's all about asking the right types of questions. And as you say, open-ended questions are absolutely the type you want. I don't know if that helps, Andy.
No, that's great. Thank you.
No problem. Andy, I think I see another point you've made about gaining access to the previous inductions recordings. David, are you able to help with that?
Sorry, Derek, I was on mute there. I was blathering away. Sorry, I've just noticed. Yeah, so I've replied to Andrew and Nicola in there just to let us. Well, Nicola said it's a business. Andrew, you can let us know what program is, and we'll get the relevant program-specific induction recording over to you. That's not a problem. There's a question in here, Derek, from Craig Mitchell. Is there a bit more guidance for mentors on developing the work-based scenarios for the GA? Just in terms of some context, many businesses are quite narrowly focused in the scope of works that they carry out, and many areas of the curriculum, e.g. groundworks or foundations, are out with the normal scope of the business might routinely carry out. So I suppose it's that matching up of learning outcomes with work-based scenarios, Derek, again.
Yeah, so this is what we would refer to, Craig, as alignment of the workplace environment with the curriculum. So this is really where I would encourage you to take the opportunity to request a meeting with the personal tutor or with the program director. They may be the same person, it depends who's been assigned to your GA. But that person, as an academic, as a tutor, will be able to talk about the curriculum and what's required in terms of providing evidence or creation of a portfolio, which will be sufficient to allow the academic team to assess it as evidence of learning against the curriculum. So that really leads to the points you've raised, which is, well, what if our business doesn't do that kind of stuff? And that's where the personal tutor or the program director will be able to say, okay, in that case, we need to look at where we can plug that gap, either by the university providing some kind of lab experience or simulation or some project or something along those lines, or can the business itself provide some exposure to learning that will plug the gap. So if it's not something that's part of your core business, do you, for example, perhaps subcontract that activity, or can you work in partnership with another organization successfully? That organization itself might be a place that the individual could go on, what you might refer to as a secondment, just for a little while till they pick up that learning, can satisfy that element of the curriculum, and then can, move on to the next part. So it might be that you have an internal department that they can go and work with. It's not your team, but it's another team within the business, or it might be completely out with the business, because within construction, for example, there's a lot of subcontractor or contracted work, because that's not what you do as a business. Does that help?
It does a bit, yes, but it's, I mean, the example is that our business is predominantly refurbishment works on old buildings. We work for the MOD. So
Okay.
I currently got a job at Edinburgh Castle putting up flagpoles, but we never build anything new. We never dig a hole in the ground. So there's chunks of that curriculum that we've got no access to providing experience to that apprentice to get on with. And I was reviewing it with her, going through the whole, you know, all the modules that she's got to go through, and I could probably get 40–50% of it where I could say, yeah, I can see where that fits in our business. But there's the other, 40–50% where I really can't. And I don't know, I wasn't quite sure how to plug that gap at this point.
Yeah, well, I understand the predicament, Craig, and I go back to what I was saying. I think you would be well advised to explore this concern, and it's just a concern over the alignment of the curriculum with what you do as a business. Explore that with the program director, probably, for the program. Now, if you're not sure who that is, then get in touch with us and we can point you in the right direction. But if you're already connected with a personal tutor, as I say, they may also be the program director. So it depends who's been aligned to your student. So use that channel and ask them if you can have a meeting just to chat through the concern you're raising here. Because what you're raising here is not so much about mentoring, it's more about the alignment of what you do with a business, what you do as a business naturally, and how that aligns with the curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite helpful. That's a channel that I'll pursue, and I'll follow up on that. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, no problem.
Derek, I mean, I suppose just on that, I think that's not an unusual thing that we've come across, but that's something that's come up.
It does come up regularly,
times,
yeah,
absolutely.
so
it's
yeah,
not a. But the point being, I suppose that's. I'm sure they can work around that just from experience. There's not any. I suppose just a quick point. There's been a few people in the chat just asking for links through to various induction recordings. So just to let you know, if I haven't, I think I've picked everybody up. If I haven't, just to let you know that we'll go back through these and make sure that everyone who's requested an induction recording gets the correct one. I can't see any new questions, and I can't see any hands up just now. So I can give a wee minute for any final questions, I guess. But just to reiterate Derek's point, thanks very much for everybody for turning up. Great attendance today. It was great to see so many people on the call.
Kevin, I'm just looking at a couple of points you've made in the chat. I'm just wondering if you feel they've been addressed now.
Yeah, sorry, I don't think I formed my question very well, but the other gentleman formed it much better. I'm just trying to make the work-based assessments or the work-based learning relative, tangible to the classroom, to the syllabus.
Yeah, so you're best to discuss that type of question
with a personal tutor.
Yeah,
Yep.
or the program
Yep.
director, either one of those. Yeah, yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. No, I've made a note. I'm going to speak to our group because unlike
That's
the last
great.
chat, we do have a number of different departments in which
Yeah,
the mentee would be.
so you're right.
Or benefit to be exposure to,
Absolutely, you're absolutely right to raise that as something you want to explore further. But the person that's going to be able to help you with that from the university is going to be, within the school of the program that your student is on.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much, Derek.
That's okay. You're welcome.
Sorry to mute again. Charles, I've just saw your question there about the inductions only for first years or as an induction every year. Jolie, can you remind me? I think by and large they're just for the first years, apart from maybe business. I can't remember.
Sorry, David, can you repeat?
Sorry, there's a question in there. Just Charles has asked a question about were the inductions only for first years or as an induction every year?
So the inductions are for new starts.
Yep.
So, you know, if you have a GA that started in second year this year, they would have still been invited. So the GA inductions are for new starts, but I'm sure that the programme directors and lecturers do some sort of induction when they come back every year, but it won't be the kind of main induction that we are referring to.
Right, thank you, Julie.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Derek, I mean, I think if there's no more questions, yeah, happy to close the session now.
Yeah, I think if we are done with questions, then we will just wish everyone well and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks for the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, thanks. Right.
Cheers, Derek.